to a special announcement from Prose. As you can probably tell, my voice is a bit shot. This last Sunday marks the first time that we here at Prose missed a deadline. Unfortunately, that was due to a mix of being out of country for my job and the voice that you now hear before you. I'm hoping that this voice will get a little bit better, and I'll be back with episodes during the regular rotation, so not this Sunday, but the next. I do have some additional fun announcements that will be coming your way once I have a voice to deliver them. Until then, I will hush. I'm going to re-release another episode right behind this, just for the sake of giving you something, and thank you so much for your patience. I'll see you in about a week and a half.
The Cypriot Empress and Her Empire, an original short story by Jared I. McGee. The royal purple is the noblest shroud. It was quickly becoming obvious to everyone that it was too late to flee, but they were still going to make a run for it nonetheless. The royal retainers were bustling and grabbing everything they thought they could carry in this inevitable flight away from the mighty capital in the slight galley that was sat waiting to carry them to safety from the emperor's private harbor. Gold, fabrics, official seals, and implements of state. They were trying to take too much. That was obvious to everyone, but how else was her emperor husband to regain the upper hand from the rebels that were, at this very moment, pushing to destroy everything that they had built together over the years? She just couldn't believe that this was happening in the midst of what was, by all accounts, the revival and resurgence of Byzantine power. The peoples of the great nations of the world were already calling her husband the Great, yet here they were at this crossroads that saw them parting with the life that they knew. As she continued to watch Justinian and his advisors clamoring and falling all over themselves as they prepared to make this final run to the harbor, she made up her mind. She had risen too far to allow this horse-cheering rabble and this shadow of a man, Hypatius, to oust her now. She thought of how to stop this flight down this fearful reactionary path that Justinian seemed already well down. Belisarius. How she hated that man. But he was loyal through and through to Justinian, despite his wronging him at her urging in the not-so-distant past. He would have to wrong the general again in the not-so-distant future, too. The Empress knew how to keep these grasping little men in their place, after all. As rough as Belisarius was, and as much as she disapproved, the man was a military genius and could rally the troops who maintained their loyalty to the royal couple. And Mundus, the barbarian from the wilds of Germania, was intolerable, but, like Belisarius, he would die for her husband without their even having to ask. As vile as the man was to her, she would have to swallow that dislike, at least for the time being. She stood gathering all her confidence and grace, speaking out in a booming voice that echoed across the cavernous adorned spaces of the throne room.
No.
She spoke honestly and with such a matter-of-fact tone that all the panicking men stopped utterly still in the middle of whatever action they were seeking to complete, effectively halting the departure. She was self-effacing amid the confidence, begging their pardon and all but apologizing for speaking in the councils of men, admitting that, yes, she was but a lowly woman, but even the lowliest of women could and should speak up in times of crisis if their convictions are firm and their purpose divine. She spoke against this craven departure. She spoke against being afraid of death in this world. They were born to die, each in their own time, after all. That was already written in God's book, and nothing they did here and now would change that or help them escape such a fate. Most pointedly, she made clear that her divinely chosen husband and she would not be running because they would not be reduced to mere fugitives in their own nation. They had been raised to this position by God himself, and they would die wearing the royal purple reserved for the imperial family. They would not be beggars or commoners in these last moments. Purple was, in truth, the best shroud for an empress. She went on to let Justinian know that she would not judge him for leaving. It was his choice after all. But to her, safety was worse than death. Dying nobly was the only option. The men around her gaped. They all slowly turned to the emperor to see if he would admonish her, to see if he would shout out that she had overstepped her bounds, all but calling God's chosen ruler of the greatest empire on earth a coward. But to their surprise, Justinian was smiling. No, giggling, laughing, guffawing, and chortling with such force he dropped the items he'd been hugging and doubled over, slapping his thighs in delight. The emperor roared his love and respect for his noble wife. He thanked her profusely, repeatedly. He approached her as she stood there stately in front of their shared throne. He embraced her. He kissed her passionately.
Amazing woman!
She had done it then. They would signal to the captain of the galley that there would be no running tonight. No falling from imperial couple to refugee vagabonds. Belisarius and Mundus would be called to them. They would be ordered to muster the loyalists and to go and decimate this refuse that was cluttering up the hippodrome and threatening Byzantium. She smiled as Justinian barked out orders that, no matter what the cost and no matter what the justifications given, the generals and their men should slaughter indiscriminately, and, when they inevitably found the pretender Hypatius, he was to be made an example of. He was not to be given a hero's death, nor was he to be allowed to die without suffering. Other would-be rebels should see the divine retribution that comes when they question Justinian the Great. As the men dropped their burdens they had been gathering for their nighttime escape and began to execute the orders, as Justinian began to don his imperial armor and prepared to at least look the part of the best general in the impregnable city, as the spineless advisors who had originally proposed making a break from the city shuffled their feet and began to ponder how they might regain the emperor's favor in the wake of their cowardice, she sat back down in her throne. No matter what others said, she found the gilded seat comfortable. She was born to rule in this life. Theodora leaned back and watched these men put into motion the machinations that would save and secure her empire. Thank you for listening to The Cypriot Empress and Her Empire, an original short story by Jared I. McGee. All sound effects and backing tracks for The Cypriot Empress and Her Empire were taken from www.freesound.org, an amazing community based on sharing that enhances a great many projects with sound. These particular effects are provided by many different free sound contributors. Mayer Kunst is responsible for the haunting female vocals. Clank Bleed recorded the ambient cathedral background noises. P. Franzen created the battle track. And the pretty synth melody in C minor is the work of Lemon Cream. A sincere thank you to these artists and to freesound.org for all of their contributions. All of these sounds are being used under Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike License 3.0. As always, please keep your eyes peeled for the next short story from Jared